Here's how you can write realistic MIDI guitar performances. Tip 1. Silence is your enemy. Anytime I am sent suboptimal guitar MIDI, usually there's going to be really odd silences. You have the guitarist playing these really cool chugs or chords, followed by silence, a sort of silence that couldn't even be made in real life. When a guitarist mutes their notes, there is going to be noise, whether it's strings ringing, the left hand moving, or, most importantly, release noise, the type of sound that the string makes as your right hand mutes it. Now, Odin 3, for example, already has these release noises built in automatically. So if you go into, for example, the playing tab and then you go under human noises, the mute knob specifically is going to give you those types of noises. So you can turn that to like 100% and you will always hear those release noises. However, you can take it a bit further. You can also go into scrapes and noises, the key switch for example, and you can trigger those release noises manually. Maybe you just really want them to be even louder, more in the face, maybe you want to layer multiples of them, and that way you're going to be able to shape those types of silences. Now, beyond it happening automatically in the engine, and then you also manually being able to add it with scrapes and noises, a third little trick I like to use is making them even more over the top. And the way I do this is I will copy paste the last note, so right before the silence, make it extremely short, and then turn that note into a palm mute. And then you can experiment, do you want a really bloomy palm mute there or more of a dead note? It doesn't really matter that much because you're cutting it so short that you're really only getting the impact. And that impact is going to be the type of noise you get when your right hand slams into the string. So this is the type of mute you want to do after like a huge chord like ba. You don't want it to be every single time, that's going to be too over the top, but it's something to experiment with because a guitarist isn't always going to mute the exact same way. So that third option is more if you want an extreme type of mute. But by using all three options, you're going to ensure that you're not creating fake silence. And that leads us to tip number 2. Silence is still your enemy. Yeah, I'm really driving this home. So in tip number 2, we're not just talking about release noises, but we're also talking about random noise. And what do I mean by random noise? Well, imagine you have a guitar in your hands, it's plugged into an amp, and let's say you don't have a crazy noise gate on, right? You just have the amp, so you probably have some type of noise floor, there's some stuff going on. Try and keep your guitar perfectly still. Maybe you're able to do that, but now try to turn. Maybe move your left hand, maybe move your right hand. You will very quickly notice that it's impossible to keep a guitar completely silent. So now when you're performing a riff, and you're going from one spot in the neck to another spot, or maybe after you're muting, you have to move your right hand to some other string. All of those movements are also creating sound. So not just the muting sound, but every other movement as well. And so I understand that in modern metal, we're constantly cutting those sounds away. So maybe you don't really need it at that point. Maybe you're making something like Spirit Box or Sleep Token or Architects. These kinds of bands are making their guitars extremely tight. Maybe you don't need it for those types of performances. But anything else, you're playing a chord, and then you have a little bit of a silence, and then you play another chord, there better be some type of noise happening. The type of real noise that your left and right hand would make as you're playing sloppily. Once again, in the scrapes and noises key switch in Odin 3.2, you have these types of noises, and so you can sprinkle them across your performance to ensure that your take isn't completely perfect. Tip number 3. String selection. Now, in deeply sampled guitars like Odin 3, you're going to have access to every single fret on every single string. This means a particular riff can probably be played in like 3 different ways sometimes. And it's crucial that you actually utilize this, because A riff isn't going to sound amazing in all 3 spots, or maybe in your particular song, the riff is going to sound its best in one particular spot. So be sure to figure out, hey, this riff sounds cool, but would it be cooler if I played it a bit more bright? Would it be cooler if I played it a bit more warm? You might think that you can just do this with EQ, but nothing could be further from the truth. A DI that was recorded at the very top of the neck or at the very bottom of the neck, there's no type of EQ that can fix that difference. And so you really want to make sure that your performance is being played where you think it will sound best. Now there's many ways you can do string selection in Odin in particular. You can either turn on Midi channel string selection, which means depending on which Midi channel your note is played in, you will be playing on said specific string. Or you can just do it automatically. If you go into playing and then string select, and on auto, you can just choose the position. So maybe you're in position 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, higher and higher up the neck. Or if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, but you don't want to use Midi channel string selection, you can use the key switches to once again control where every single thing is played. Finally, you can also choose the tuning. So for example, maybe you have a riff and it could be played on like a 7 string or an 8 string or a 6 string. That's also going to sound different. Something being played on the 12th string of an 8 string, you know, all baritone style, is going to be much warmer than drop C on a 6 string. Once again, you can go into advanced and into tuning and just change that, and maybe your riff just sounds way better in a different tuning and you didn't even realize it yet. A final tip I want to add to that is that you shouldn't necessarily just assume, oh, I would play it this way in real life, so I'll play it this way in this MIDI guitar. Maybe it sounds way cooler in position 4, you know, you could be playing it on your real guitar in position 3 and you thought it sounded dope, but if it sounds better on the virtual guitar in position 4, just change it, who cares? If it sounds good, it is good. Tip 4, chord delay. Now, one thing I see people do very often with virtual guitars is they will play every single note in a chord at the exact same time. And what that really means, if you were to translate that into reality, is that you have your fist like this, and you have a pick here, and a pick here, and a pick here, and you are picking the chord like this, because that's the only way you could ever pick all of those strings exactly simultaneously. So obviously that isn't very realistic. You want every single note in your chord to be played one by one. Now that one by one could be a very, very quick one by one, but the fact that your pick attack is being delayed and so you have impact after impact after impact is a huge difference. Same story for your transient, by the way. So this is why chord delay is crucial. You can do it manually, but Odin 3 also just has this as a feature. So in playing, you have auto chord delay, and the higher you turn it up, the more delay you have between each note in a chord, and this way you're going to have way more realistic strumming. Tip 5. Vary your palm mutes. While it would be amazing to just use my favorite bloomy palm mutes every single time, you know, the ones we added in 3.1 and then later on we actually expanded in 3.2, those sound cool, but a guitarist isn't always going to palm mute the exact same in their riff. Whether it's because they had trouble muting the exact same way because they just changed string and now they have to travel back. Maybe because of that they're getting a little bit tighter or a little less tight. Varying which types of palm mutes you're going to be using is going to allow you to make things sound way more human, especially because maybe you're playing the same riff 3-4 times throughout the song. It would be very odd if that riff sounded the exact same every single time. Now, the listener may have forgotten if the riff is being repeated like later into the song, maybe 2 minutes after, that's fine. But if it's just riff after riff after riff, same, it might be cool to add some variations. And once again, you could also use the scrapes and noises to maybe add some variations that way, but also varying your palm mutes can be very, very interesting. In Odin 3 in particular, we have 4 different kinds, so just experiment. And of course, not every palm mute is going to be awesome in every single portion of your song. I think dead mutes might sometimes be a little too deathcore or maybe even genty for something like an old school metalcore song or something like that. But just experiment. The options are there, and so the bigger your toolkit is, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to translate your ideas into the real world. Tip 6. Hammer-ons and pull-offs. Deeply sampled guitars are going to have hammer-ons and pull-offs. Not every single note in your performance needs to be picked. There's a huge difference between a hammered-on note and a picked note. And there's actually also a huge difference between a hammer-on note and a pulled-off note. So sprinkling those in your performance whenever they make sense is really, really interesting. Tip 7. Delay compensation. Maybe your particular instrument has a little bit of pre-attack before the transient. If you want to ensure that it's hitting exactly on the beat, you might want to put some delay compensation on your MIDI track to put it exactly where you want it. For example, on Odin 3, I like to use around minus 20 milliseconds, but on other instruments, maybe something like a violin and Contact in particular, I will often put like minus 50 milliseconds because that bowing kind of needs time to get to the point where I think it should be on beat. And so just experiment with that. We also have a tutorial on that actually if you want to check that out, where I show you how to do it in every single DAW. A bunch of that footage actually came from our amazing Discord community, so if you want to join that, link will be in the description. We just have a bunch of people who love virtual instruments and love creating awesome metal, rock, punk music and so forth. So if you want to join that kind of community, link will be in the description. And as always, happy producing.